If you would have told me a month ago that the Orioles were going to go a stretch here without Cedric Mullins and without Ryan Mountcastle, I would have been heavily concerned for their offense. But honestly, it hasn't been a huge deal. The Orioles with another 11-run output on Tuesday night to blast the Blue Jays. And I'll recap it all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, June 14th, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap another big win for the Orioles as they beat the Blue Jays 11-6 on Tuesday night, win the opener in this series, and get to 5 consecutive victories. I'll get to the 5 things you need to know from that one, including Gunnar Henderson staying red hot, the offense just on fire top to bottom, and Dean Kremer getting things done despite not having his best stuff on the mound. Then we'll talk a little bit more about this offense without Cedric Mullins, how they are continuing to chug along. And finally, the big IL news and roster move from Tuesday as Ryan Mountcastle was placed on the injured list, what it means for him, the O's, and what they'll do with the roster moving forward. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So let's jump into an Orioles victory. Final score from Oriole Park at Camden Yards on Tuesday night. In Game 1 of a 3-game series, the Orioles win it 11-6 over the Toronto Blue Jays. O's have now won all 4 matchups against the Jays so far this season after sweeping a 3-game series north of the border in Toronto back in May. For the Orioles, it is their 5th consecutive victory, now 4-0 so far on this homestand, and the win gets them to 42-24 on the season. Hey, maybe the red-hot Oakland Athletics, only team hotter than the O's right now, can beat the Rays again on Tuesday night. Hopefully they did. If you're listening to this, game hasn't finished yet as I'm recording, but they did it on Monday. Why couldn't they do it again? Maybe the O's can gain a little ground there. But I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles 11-6 win over the Blue Jays. And the first thing you need to know is Gunnar Henderson is so absolutely back. Now, his last month has been incredible. He's hitting over 330 in his last month since his average basically tanked at 170 back on May 12th. But since then, he's been amazing. And specifically in June, he has basically been unstoppable. Henderson in this game, once again, hitting leadoff. He was the DH for this one in the Orioles lineup. Henderson goes 3 for 5 with a home run and 4 RBIs. That home run, the thing that kind of not put this thing away, I would say, and we'll get to why that was the case a little bit later, but really gave the O's a giant cushion with a grand slam off of Blue Jays starter Chris Bassett in the 3rd inning. For Henderson, his 10th home run of the year. He had 4 hard hit balls in this game. He's just mashing. He is just mashing the baseball right now. The home run left the bat at 101. He had a single that left the bat at 104, another single at 100 miles an hour. He had a fly out at 95 off the bat. Was just able to sneak that grand slam into the bullpen. I thought the entire way Kevin Kiermaier was going to rob that homer because, listen, as Orioles fans know, he seemingly always robs that homer, but somehow Kiermaier couldn't get to this one. The grand slam gave the O's an 8-1 lead, and they would go on to win it. Henderson now in June, 14 for 29. That is a 483 batting average in June with 5 home runs and 11 RBIs. It is only June 14th as I talk now. We are not even halfway through the month, and Henderson has just been amazing. 5 homers as well. This is the player we knew we'd see at some point this year. Honestly, this is better than the player we knew we'd see. This is incredible. He can't be stopped at the moment. And speaking of guys who can't be stopped, the second thing you need to know from this Orioles victory is that the Orioles might have just fixed Aaron Hicks and Ryan O'Hearn. I mean, I know we've talked about this a bit already here on the pod, specifically since O'Hearn got a more regular role and Hicks was signed after the Mullins injury. But the both of them, once again, just coming through for the Orioles. Ryan O'Hearn only did have a 1-for-5 in this game, but the one was a big one, a 2-run shot in the third inning that he hit the other way on a breaking ball, just knocked it into the bullpen to give the Orioles a 4-1 lead. That one came off Chris Bassett as well, who was just terrible. 3 innings, 8 runs on 11 hits and 3 home runs against the Orioles. The O's just clobbered him for 11 hard hit balls in 3 innings. And then there's Aaron Hicks, who also homered in this game, went 2-for-4 with a homer and a walk and a single as well. These guys are just clicking right now. And they're veteran guys who had their struggles recently with the Royals and the Yankees, and you just didn't know how much to expect out of these two guys. I mean, you really didn't. And all of a sudden, you got Aaron Hicks hitting the home run in the 4th inning, 97 off the bat. You got O'Hearn crushing 103 off the bat the other way, 395 feet. It's just working with these two guys in the lineup. And as I mentioned at the top, with Mullins out and now with Mountcastle out, you have the easy fill-in of Hicks in center field, O'Hearn at first base, and they're producing just as well, if not better, than those two guys were. And that's really helped this offense. Speaking of the offense, the third thing you need to know from this one, just a full offensive effort from the Orioles in this one. Scoring 11 runs for the second consecutive game, 17 hits for the Oriole offense in this one. It was just honestly crazy to watch them. 21 hard hit balls in 8 innings is absurdity. That is what the Orioles did, though, in this game. 2 in the second on the Adam Frazier 2-run homer, 6 in the third on the O'Hearn homer, and then the Henderson grand slam. Then they added 1 in the 4th, 1 in the 5th, 1 in the 6th. Did not score the 7th and the 8th, but that was okay, and got the 11-6 win. Even before the Gunnar Henderson grand slam, which came in the 3rd inning, even before that grand slam, every single Oriole had a hit in the game so far. When Henderson stepped up for his 3rd plate appearance with 2 outs and the bases loaded in the 3rd inning, the Orioles had 9 hits, and each of their starters had 1 hit. It was insane. Henderson, I mentioned with the big game. Adley Rutschman, 2-for-5 with a couple of doubles and 4 hard hit balls. Maybe you all can stop reaching out to tell me how worried you are about Adley Rutschman. He's the best hitting catcher in baseball. Anthony Santander, 2-for-5 with an RBI. Mentioned O'Hearn. Austin Hayes, 2-for-5 with a couple of doubles. Mentioned Aaron Hicks. Adam Frazier, 2-for-5, including his 2-run homer. Had another RBI. Ramon Urias with a 2-for-5. Even Jorge Mateo, 1-for-3 with a single and a walk in this game. Everybody did it up and down the lineup, full performance. Just so fun to watch them jump on this Blue Jays team. Fourth thing you need to know from this one as we switch it over to the pitching side, Dean Kremer, listen, he wasn't his best, but he did his job in this game for the Orioles, especially once they got him the 6-run third and they went up 8-1. He just cruised through and did his job. 6 innings for Dean Kremer, 2 runs on 8 hits. He struck out 6, and the big thing you want to do with a 7-run lead, he did not walk anyone in 6 innings of work through 95 pitches. Now, the Blue Jays squared him up from time to time, 9 hard hit balls against him in 6 innings, and he got a little lucky to get out of there with just the 2 runs that he allowed over the 6 innings. But that's sometimes all you need when you score 11 runs, just a pitcher who's going to pitch into the 6th, maybe beyond, get you some outs, keep the other team down. And he did have 13 whiffs. The 4-seam fastball was really good, 7 whiffs on 17 swings against that pitch. Threw it 36 out of his 95 pitches. He was all around the strike zone all day, as you could tell from the 0 walks. And once again, it was fastball heavy. His 3 most used pitches, 4-seamer, then cutter, then sinker. But he did go to the curveball and change just enough to keep the Blue Jays off balance. And again, wasn't his best, still was getting squared up. But that's been the story a lot for Dean Kremer this year. Getting squared up, but limiting damage, and another quality start for the Orioles right-hander. And the 5th and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 11-6 win over the Blue Jays is that, well, the bullpen didn't exactly make you feel good about this one. Now, Brian Baker did start it off well. He came out there in the 7th inning with the O's up 11-2, pitched a scoreless 7th with a hit and a walk. That was good to see for him. Then the O's, as they should have, go to Austin Voth in the top of the 8th, or in the top of the 7th, excuse me. No, it wasn't the top of the 8th. It's just crazy to think how many outs the Orioles had to get in this game. Austin Voth, after kind of a disaster outing on Saturday, another disaster outing for him on Tuesday. Gets just 1 out, allows a homer, allows a walk, 3 hits, 2 earned runs, comes out of the game. CNL Perez comes in, does a great job, gets the next 2 batters out, in the 8th, keeps it an 11-4 game, gets to the 9th. Then Perez stays on in the 9th, and his disaster happens. He loads up the bases, 2 runs, 2 hits against him, 2 walks, no strikeouts. And all of a sudden, it's 11-5 with the bases loaded and 2 outs, and the Orioles have to go to Mike Baumann, who allows an infield hit for a run to score, and then finally gets a strikeout, leaving the tying run on deck to end the game. And listen, that strike 3 that he got the call on against Danny Jansen probably was not a strike, but he got the benefit of the doubt to end the game. Now, the Orioles did have to actually get Felix Bautista up and throwing a bit in the 9th inning, which was unfortunate for a game when you're leading 11-2 in the 8th. But even though he threw, he didn't come into the game, and that was big. That is now 4 consecutive days that the Orioles have not had to use Felix Bautista or Yennier Cano. They both pitched Friday night in the win against the Royals. Neither had to pitch Saturday or Sunday, had the off day Monday, and neither pitches on Tuesday. That is the longest break that I think either of them have gotten this year. And it's just the 7th Orioles win of the season. Shout out to Masson for this stat. It's only the 7th win of the season in which the O's haven't used Cano or Bautista. And the bullpen didn't finish it off well, but at least they still didn't have to use those guys. And they got the win. At the end of the day, the offense was great. They held on, and the Orioles win it 11-6, have now won 5 games in a row. And this offense is looking good. Back-to-back games with 11 runs. And you maybe wouldn't expect that with Mullins out and now Mountcastle out as well. But coming up next, I'll talk about what has really led to the O's offense still kicking it and honestly hitting a little bit better even at times with Cedric Mullins on the injured list. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Now, I've talked about Game Time a lot on this podcast because it is the best way to get those last-minute tickets to your favorite events. And I know many of your favorite events, Baltimore Orioles games, well, they've got the tickets right there on Game Time. It's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the games near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you will have. I went to the game Sunday. I literally went on Game Time at 1:15 for a 1:35 game, bought tickets for $3 and went to the game. Just like that, walked to the stadium. That's how easy Game Time makes it. They've got flash deals, which I used to get the best tickets, and they got the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, everything you would need from a ticket app, and it's super, super easy to use. You get image of your seats before you buy, so you know exactly where you expect to arrive, and the tickets get sent right to your phone immediately. So easy. So snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So the Orioles take down the Blue Jays 11-6 on Tuesday night. Bullpen was a little shaky late, but they held on to win the game, take the first game of the series, and they have won now 5 in a row. And if you notice, 11 runs, it's a pretty good output for the Orioles offense. And when they go back-to-back games with 11 runs, now that is very, very impressive. And a cool stat that Masson put up during the end of the broadcast on Tuesday, the Orioles, for the first time this year, had 6 or more players record at least 2 hits in a game. That happened on Tuesday, when 7 Orioles out of their 9 starters recorded a multi-hit game. That was Henderson, Rutschman, Santander, Hayes, Hicks, Frazier, and Urias all had at least 2 hits. The Orioles had 5 starters record 2 hits or more in the same game twice this year. The first one was all the way back on opening day in the win against the Red Sox. And the other one was literally Sunday when they scored 11 runs against the Royals. So you could argue Tuesday night was their best offensive game of the year. And you wouldn't have predicted that, a month or so ago. If I told you that, the O's would have their best offensive game of the year against a good team in the Blue Jays and against a good starting pitcher in Chris Bassett when they have Cedric Mullins out with a groin injury and Ryan Mountcastle out with vertigo. He was placed on the IL on Tuesday. We'll get to that in just a bit. But in the 12 games since the Orioles lost Cedric Mullins, since he left that Monday Memorial Day game against the Guardians with the groin injury, the Orioles have 69 runs in 12 games. Now, I understand if you take out the last 2 games. I get it. It's 47 runs in 10 games. That's still pretty good, 4.7, but it's not the 5.8 runs per game they have now in the 12 without Cedric with the back-to-back 11. So I understand that. But still, during that 12-game stretch, 5.8 runs per game, 69 runs, that is top 5 in baseball. The Orioles are getting through it without Cedric Mullins. And this is not to say, hey, Aaron Hicks is better than Cedric Mullins or Ryan O'Hearn is better than Cedric Mullins. But this is to say that they can sustain this kind of injury. Now, they're going to get even better when Mullins returns, hopefully by the end of this month or early in July. But they're holding on, at least at this point. And things have turned around recently. I mean, the offense didn't look great in that Brewers series, but then they've kicked it on since then. Now, it's coincided with Gunnar Henderson getting hot. I mentioned in June, he's hitting .483 with 5 homers. Cedric Mullins only didn't play the last game of May, so basically lining up right there. You've got Ryan O'Hearn. Since Cedric Mullins went down, he's 12 for 30. That's a .400 average with 4 doubles and 3 homers. You'll take that stepping in. And Aaron Hicks, as we've talked about, has been a great replacement. Hicks has still reached base in every single game that he has played in an Orioles uniform, and he has been super productive. He's played most of the games in center field since the Orioles signed him a day after Mullins went down. And after all of his struggles he had had the last 2+ years with the Yankees, they made some little tweaks to Aaron Hicks, and Hicks has looked like, honestly, a completely different hitter. He's looked like the Aaron Hicks of 4 or 5 years ago, at the end of his time with the Twins and at the beginning of his tenure with the Yankees. So, I mean, that has helped, kind of looking like you're getting prime Aaron Hicks back at this point. And, since he came over to the Orioles, Hicks is hitting .350 on the year. So, yeah, you'll take that from Aaron Hicks. And you look at the rest of the team, and guys are producing. Santander and Arias were both in long slumps. They're starting to really pull out of those things. Adley Rutschman wasn't hitting great. He had a couple of doubles on Tuesday night, though. And you still have a couple of guys that are still slumping, but, Austin Hayes still doing his thing, hitting .300. This order is still pulling things together while Mullins and now Mountcastle are out. And you had, the back-to-back games with 11 runs, but really Tuesday shows you this offense is going to let up. The fact that before the Gunnar Grand Slam, everybody had 2 plate appearances and every starter had had at least 1 hit just shows the depth of this lineup. And again, if I had told you those lineups going to have a lot of depth with Mullins and Mountcastle out, on opening day, I would have called you crazy for saying that. But O'Hearn and Hicks just stepping up right now and helping this team, and it's huge. Now, can they sustain 6 runs per game without Cedric Mullins? No, I don't think so. Ryan O'Hearn's had hot streaks before it and then has cooled off. That's why the Royals eventually gave up on him this offseason. Aaron Hicks has been really, really bad the past 2 years. Maybe he goes back to that level. But with Gunnar playing this well, we know he's this good. We know Adley's this good. And if Santander keeps hitting, they've got the top of the order figured out right now without Mullins and Mountcastle. So I think they can sustain it. And that's the big thing. Just sustain it, have the pitchers do their thing, and you can continue winning games. And that's how you get to 42-24 on the season. But I've been mentioning Mountcastle being out. We got to talk about what's happening with Ryan Mountcastle, why he's on the injured list, what move the Orioles already made, but what move they'll really make more so long-term, potentially later this week. We'll talk about that to finish off the pod coming up next. So the Orioles took down the Blue Jays by a score of 11-6 on Tuesday night, winning game 1 of this 3-game series. The O's, who have now won 4 out of 4 this season against the Blue Jays. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll definitely take that against a team that I have definitely learned to hate over the years. But game 2 coming up tonight between the O's and the Jays, a 7:05 p.m. Eastern time start. It'll be Jose Barrios getting the ball for the Blue Jays. Barrios was kind of a tough scene for the Blue Jays last year, but he has figured it out again this season. He's looked like the ace he was when he was in Minnesota before the trade to Toronto. Has a 3.61 ERA with 70 strikeouts in 77 innings in 13 starts so far this season. His last time out against Houston, 6 innings, 2 runs, 2 Ks, 2 walks, and 4 hits. And he will go up against Kyle Bradish, who will make the start in this Wednesday night game for the Orioles. And Kyle Bradish, 26-year-old righty, 4.25 ERA in 11 starts on the season. His last time out, he gave up those 3 runs on Thursday in the first inning against the Brewers, and then just was incredible for the next 4 innings. Strikes out 10 batters, allows 3 runs over 5 innings of work. Hopefully he can continue that momentum into tonight's game. And you can catch every pitch of Game 2 between the Orioles and the Blue Jays and every pitch of the Orioles' hometown radio broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Orioles. But one guy you won't hear playing, if you're listening to the radio broadcast here tonight, is Ryan Mountcastle, who, after missing all 3 games over the weekend against the Royals, we had heard he was sick, was dealing with an illness. There was a little bit of chatter. I had heard that he was experiencing some dizziness. Well, that's what it was. Ryan Mountcastle officially placed on the injured list actually pretty late on Tuesday. It was like 10 minutes before first pitch on Tuesday. The Orioles obviously were putting him through some drills, some swinging in the cage, really trying to see if he was going to be available for the game, and then decided he is not. He is placed on the 10-day injured list with vertigo. Now, vertigo, not something to mess with, right? I mean, if you're unfamiliar, it's kind of, on the base level, like you can just kind of get dizzy or lightheaded kind of at any time, stumbling over, not being able to get your balance, a lot of nausea involved with vertigo as well. It can be a tough thing to live with, especially if, you're living with it for long periods of time. And, sometimes it leads to or can point to other things, but that is a really, really tough thing to be dealing with, especially for a baseball player who relies so much on your balance, on your hand-eye coordination. Vertigo messes with all of those things. And so when you look at Ryan Mountcastle, who, is out with the illness, he has been hitting 158 with 20 strikeouts and just 1 home run in his last 15 games, has really, really been struggling over the last month or so. I mean, that could be an explainer why. I mean, if you're just dealing with something that ends up being vertigo, but you're not really sure what it is, and you're dealing with this on and off dizziness or whatever it may be, even if you're just dealing with it a little bit, that could completely throw off a major league hitter. And I kind of understand maybe why the struggles have been happening so much for Mountcastle. I mean, that's really tough. I hope, he can get this under control, get himself off the injured list fairly quickly, and get back to the Orioles lineup. That's not something you want to mess around with. That can really, hinder people's lives. And so hopefully, what he's dealing with is hopefully maybe temporary. He can get it fixed, but wishing the best to Ryan Mountcastle. And, there was talk of, will there be a Mountcastle O'Hearn platoon at this point with Mountcastle struggling so much? I'm not sure they'll do that when he gets back, because they'll maybe want to see, all right, if he's really healthy and the vertigo isn't bothering him anymore, let's see what he looks like at the plate then make that decision. But if O'Hearn's still hitting, there could be a platoon there. I mean, O'Hearn's been that good and Mountcastle's been that bad at times, but I do want to see what he looks like healthy before making that decision. It's certainly a possibility, though. But the question is, okay, what do the Orioles do with the roster now? Yes, Ryan Mountcastle hasn't been a huge contributor over the past month. And yes, he's been sitting a little bit more. And yes, he didn't even play all weekend when the Orioles swept the Royals. So they've been in life without Mountcastle for a little bit now. But he's still a guy who you trust to produce a lot of homers, a lot of RBIs, right there at the top still of the Orioles leaderboards in those categories. And he's been, even though he's been struggling, been mashing lefties all year. Those are all things you don't have as an option for your lineup right now. Well, in the short term, the Orioles activated the catcher Mark Colesberry to the roster to take Mountcastle's place. Now, a lot of people freaked out. Oh my gosh, they're adding a third catcher. Why isn't it Westberg? Why isn't it Cowser? All of this stuff. Listen, Mark Colesberry has been with the team as the taxi squad catcher for most of the season, which means he travels around as the emergency catcher. He's not on the roster, but if any catcher gets hurt, he's always there to be activated for the game. I mean, he would probably be the best catcher in Norfolk, maybe, if he was there for more time, but he's only played in 20 games in Norfolk, 76 plate appearances, and that's because he's been on the taxi squad. Now, when he's been in Norfolk, he hasn't hit at all. I mean, he's hitting 162 with a 29 WRC plus, 26 Ks to 5 walks in 76 plate appearances. So he hasn't hit at all in AAA Norfolk. But the reason why they went with Colesberry is he was probably the only hitter that was with the O's in Baltimore on the taxi squad. And because they made the move to put Mountcastle on the IL so late, right? They did it 10, 15 minutes before first pitch. They were probably still trying to figure things out. That would be most likely why it's Colesberry. Now, he did get into the game came in defensively, caught the ninth inning of the Orioles win on Tuesday. So he played a little bit of time in the big leagues with the Reds over the past couple of years. So it wasn't his big league debut or anything. Never been much of a hitter, more of a defensive catcher. And the O's do like to carry three catchers. They've done it a couple of times this year with Anthony Bemboom on the roster as well. It allows them to, start Adley and James McCann in the order against a left-handed pitcher or on a day game and still have a catcher on the bench just in case they want to do things. Like they'll probably both be in the lineup, McCann and Rutschman, in Thursday's game because it's a day game and it's against the lefty. So that's kind of the double whammy of getting McCann in there as the catcher and Adley DHing. But I don't see the Colesberry thing being the guy who's here the entire time Mountcastle is gone. Yes, he is a right-handed hitter, but he's not much of a hitter. I think it's just a 2 or 3 day thing, get you through Thursday because he was here. And then I think the O's will have a decision to make on who is really going to replace Mountcastle for the time he's on the injured list. And to be honest with you, I kind of feel like the Orioles can only choose from 3 prospects at this point. It's either Joey Ortiz, Jordan Westburg, or Colton Cowser. Now, it could be Terrin Vavra potentially. Vavra would be eligible to come back up on Thursday, so maybe after Thursday's game, it still could be Terrin Vavra. That's still a possibility. But wouldn't you all like it better if it was Cowser, Westburg, or Ortiz? If they went with Colton Cowser now, you'd probably see Anthony Santander playing mostly either DH or first base, kind of replacing Mountcastle there, flipping off with Ryan O'Hearn in that role, and Cowser would be in the outfield. If it's Joey Ortiz, it's probably because they're feeling, let's move Mateo to more of a bench role. Let's play Ortiz at shortstop a lot, maybe a little second base. And if it's Jordan Westburg, they want the ability to have a guy who can play the outfield a little bit, but maybe plan to DH him a good amount, kind of switch him off with Gunnar Henderson and Santander all kind of DHing in the lineup and get that bat in there. Now, I give a slight edge to Westburg and Ortiz because they're right-handed hitters. The Orioles roster is very left-handed hitter heavy right now. And so with Mountcastle, a righty going out, you probably want to replace it with a righty. And to be honest, unfortunately, because Ortiz is already on the 40-man and has already been up this year, I maybe give a slighter edge to Joey Ortiz to be activated. He did homer on Tuesday night. He's back from his illness that kept him out for 10 days. It could be Westburg. It could be Cowser. It could be Vavra. I'm guessing Ortiz after a couple days, but we will see. But just know, I don't think Colesberry is a long-term thing. I think it's just because he was just there on the taxi squad, get him there for a couple days, and then they will make another move. But to put Mark Colesberry on the 40-man roster, to get him on the active roster because he was not, Orioles had to make a 40-man move. And in a little bit of a surprising move, they DFA'd Noah Denoyer to make room on the 40-man. Now, Denoyer was kind of a prospect who kind of came out of nowhere in 2022, had an amazing season for the Orioles last year, and then was added to the 40-man roster this offseason to protect him from the Rule 5 draft because he was so good last year. And he got himself to AAA Norfolk this season, and it just hasn't been good. 14 appearances, 4 starts for Denoyer in 30 1/3 innings in AAA Norfolk. He has a 5.04 ERA with a 5.40 FIP. 23% strikeout rate is solid. A 15% walk rate is terrible. That's basically double the league average. That is not good. He's walking a lot of batters. And the Orioles just felt like with him struggling, this was the conversation probably. He's struggling so much that even if we think long-term he could be a piece, we're not going to use him out of the bullpen in Baltimore this year. And because you're a winning team trying to get to the playoffs, you don't really want to have guys on your 40-man who you don't plan to use at all during the season. So because of that, he gets DFA'd. Orioles probably hoping and thinking he'll pass through waivers. I don't think he's someone they really want to get rid of right now. I don't think it's been that bad. I think they have an inkling he may pass through waivers. Then they'll get him off the 40-man, be able to work with him a little bit more, maybe try and get him back on track. But that's the roster moves. And again, I think we'll see potentially another one coming up here soon. But with Ryan Mountcastle out, I know he hasn't been good, but just another hole the O's have to fill. Hopefully, as they've shown already, the depth is there to fill those holes. But that'll do it for today's episode. Orioles with another win. But remember, before we go, doing a giveaway here on the pod right now. Got to 3,000 subscribers on YouTube. That is all thanks to you. Thanks to the everydayers out there who make Locked On Orioles their first view, their first listen of the day. And so I'm doing another giveaway. I gave out a Cedric Mullins bobblehead when I got to 1,000 subscribers. I'm giving one out again at 3,000 subscribers. So to be entered to win the Cedric Mullins 30-30 bobblehead that was given out last season, you got to do two things. Number one, you have to be subscribed to Locked On Orioles on YouTube. Number two, in the comments on today's YouTube video on this episode, tell me your favorite player from the rebuild. This is a player who played for the Orioles anytime from 2018 through 2021, who is no longer with the O's, but holds like a special place in your heart throughout the rebuild. One of the guys for me, Stevie Wilkerson, Hanser Alberto. Those are a couple of the guys that just kind of hold a soft spot for me. But I will close the entries on Friday evening. I will pick a winner over the weekend, and it will be announced on Monday's episode. And remember to watch or listen to Monday's episode to hear if you won, and keep track of your comment on YouTube. I will reply to your comment in the comment section to let you know if you did win. And again, you can win the Cedric Mullins 30-30 bobblehead. But I'll be back here with you for tomorrow's episode, recapping Game 2 between the Orioles and the Blue Jays, and talking a bit about our favorite relievers who haven't really pitched this year, Michael Givens and Dylan Tate. We got more injury news from them this week. Chat about that on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.